Hi folks, you're with Tacitus Today. Tacitus Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio, radio, no pictures live stream. Just listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast, driving along in your car or your truck, or put in those earbuds and listen to it on public transport. In this essay, I'd like to talk about migrants that come to the West, in this instance Australia, and they arrive completely unprepared for life in another country with another language, with different customs and habits. They make no effort at all to integrate. They actively obstruct the children integrating when they're born in Australia. And so when the children go to school, they are utterly and completely unprepared for life at school, and the social interactions, the language issues, and everything you can imagine. And so when these people, these that were then children, they're now adults, look back, a lot of them, by the way, going into the so-called caring industries, like they're social workers and that sort of thing, they look back on their childhood and they say that they were victims of the most terrible, virulent racism. I mean, absolute Hitlerite type levels of racism, and that their life's mission is to get revenge against those evil white Nazis, 5-year-old Nazis that gave them such a hard time at school, as they would see it. Now, the idea is you might say to them, well, hey, shouldn't your parents have at least made sure that you could speak English before you went to school? They won't accept that. If they do even grudgingly accept that the parents could have done maybe a bit more, they still come back to, well, it doesn't matter. We should have been welcomed. You have the current sort of propaganda. We should have been welcomed. The fact we couldn't speak English, that we had strange customs, habits, behaviours, and food and clothes. The fact that it was that doesn't mean that we should have been treated differently. We should have been treated the same as everybody else, even though we can't speak a word of their language. Now, that's of course an absolute absurdity, but this is the view, and they cling almost desperately, I would say, to this idea that they were victims of the most terrible racism, and that the only and proper response for them today, decades after the event, is to nurse these hurts, scratch at the scabs, and engage in all sorts of insane fantasies of vengeance to white people. So let's just have a look at this, because there's a few instances. And I got one recently that came up, and it sort of encouraged me to do a video here. And I've mentioned this in the past, so I'm going over some old stuff and introducing some new stuff as well. But so these are people that one example is that they're white and they're Christian, but they come from a remote rural village in Holland, where it's away from all the highways and the main thoroughfares. So it's kind of stuck in time from hundreds of years ago, this little village. When the Nazis invaded in 1940, they didn't even bother posting sort of any troops there or anything. It's like, hey, this little place is so out of the way. So they come to Australia, and none of them speak a word of English. So, and the children are young, and they're all like preschool age, but they managed to find an area of this is in Sydney, an area in Sydney where it's like a Dutch colony, and so they're able to go and work for Dutch businesses, hang out with Dutch people, go to shops that employ Dutch people. So they make no effort to learn the language, and don't have to. The children only play with other Dutch kids, so they don't get so. So when they go to school, they naturally have problems. They still eat Dutch rural type food and cuisine that you don't really see in Australia, or certainly not in the grocery stores. They don't speak in English. They're even wearing sort of Dutch type clothes, and they've got Dutch customs and habits and behaviours. Naturally, they don't fit in. And now when at home, the family only speak Dutch in the house, and the parents make no effort to integrate, or no effort to learn English, or make any effort at all in that regard. So the children only encounter English at school. Otherwise, they're not. They don't have English speaking friends or anything like that. So, and when they get older, or when the girls get older, they complain that the guys aren't dating them, and that must be because of racism as well. So they look back on this, decades later, they're still nursing these hurts as being a terrible time where they suffered racist taunts and so on and so forth. Now they're white and Christian, and you can't tell them apart from anyone else. So it's a bit of a tough gig to push racism in this instance. So I try and introduce into the conversation. Well, hey, you knew you were in a country where English is spoken. You knew you had to go to school. Your parents knew that. Surely they should have been preparing you for the school by getting you to speak English and that sort of thing. And I mean, the one I'm talking to, she says, "Oh no, all the books we read were in Dutch, and the parents didn't want us to watch TV, and that was discouraged. And if we brought home or had a local English speaking friend, then that was frowned upon. And if Dutch kids were already here who did speak decent English came in the house, then they weren't allowed to speak English. They had to speak Dutch." And on it went. So, and again, going all to the shops and so on. Now, the Dutch would be a community that by the second generation were integrating pretty well. So, so these were a little unusual, and because they came from such a remote corner, a little pocket of Holland. Holland's not a huge country, by the way, but came from a little pocket of Holland where, again, that they were a rural farming community and they lived a life almost untouched over hundreds of years. So, but this is it. The insecurities and the hurts that were acquired back then are still pretty raw even today in this person. And you think, well, how can that be? Why didn't you? Now the brothers, the boys that went out, they had to go and they went to work for English speaking companies, so they learnt English, and you can barely. They've still actually got a very slight accent you can pick up there, because again, in order to talk to the family and the relatives, they all slip into Dutch the minute that they're together. So. But again, the effort simply wasn't made. Now, these people could have done it if the kids had spoken decent English when they went to school. And it's better that you don't take the raw herring and this and that to school. That might come across a bit unusual to the kids. So why don't I just give you a chicken salad sandwich or something like that, and then see how you go. Let's so as a parent, I mean, if that was me. As a parent, I would be very conscious of not wanting to put the children in a position where they might be subject to barbs or taunts or things like that, if that was avoidable. And it would have been easily avoidable with just a few adjustments. And yet, and a bit of extra care and a bit of extra time, they didn't do it. And the parents didn't go to English, the free English classes that were available. Quite the opposite. As she explains it, even 30, 40 years after arriving in Australia, the mother could speak English to the level of kindergarten at best. So this is the sort of thing that goes on. And again, they would have easily integrated if they just put the effort in. So now come to people who are brown or dark brown. Now here's a case. They come from a third world country, don't speak any English, and arrive. Again, they find a ghetto to go into with people from their own. Now, should that be allowed? Should that be permitted? Saying, well, why do you want to go? Oh, I can't speak English, so I want to go there. So no. You're not going there. You're going to integrate. And why would you want migrants that either don't understand what integration means, or they're not prepared to put the effort into it, or the time, or don't care, or these sorts of things? You need to really, I think, look at migrants and do you want to integrate? Because the problems that have been created by not integrating and by willfully not integrating, the social problems that creates last decades into the future and create animosities and delusions of vengeance that last for decades into the future. Do you really want that? I mean, how is that a help to anybody, the people included? So these folks come from a third world country, supposedly from a refugee camp, although just listening and reading between the lines, I doubt that. But so they arrive in Australia, they go straight into the ghetto area. They pull up the drawbridge and so on. So that the one child is like 6 months old, and again, another one's born shortly afterwards. And so I'm talking to the one that was born in Australia, and she it's two girls, and they go and live in their community. They only talk their language. They only eat their food. They only go to the shops, and so on and so forth. So they've effectively cocooned themselves off from Australian society. And again, the children aren't allowed to watch television, not allowed to have local Anglo friends or anything like that. They only interact with other Pakistanis, whatever it was, and might have been Nepalese actually, but I think it was Pakistanis. So they've got religious differences. They're quite dark brown and so on. So they then the children then go to school, and they're taking their their Indian or subcontinent food with them. I think they were Hindus actually, not Islamic. Anyway, the red dot on the head, all this sort of stuff, and the type of the way they were wearing their hair and the whole nine yards, just full on subcontinent type presentation. So the kids arrive at school again, dark brown, not many dark brown people around at the time, and they've moved to an area where they've got their little dark brown enclave, but where there's in the wider sort of area, there's very few people. The school authorities try to split them up, which is probably sensible. Rather than have them all going to one school, they send well, some of them go to this school over here, some of them go to that school over there. They're different ages, so they're not in the same form. So these kids go to school, or this particular woman, or young girl she would have been then, go to school, can't speak a lick of English, has been completely brought up in the customs and habits of the their genetic origin. They've got the parents are not integrating. They don't speak a word of English. Only whatever language they speak, Urdu or something, whatever it is spoken at home, and all the friends they have speak that as well. So she goes to school. The girl can't speak a word of English. She's sent to school with some very aromatic curry or something, and again the clothes, the hair, the way her hair's done, it's strictly subcontinent type hairstyles. So she goes to school, and she's an oddity. She stands out. I mean, not just a little bit, but a lot. Sticks out like a sore thumb. And this is going to make it very tough for her to get on in school. And it's tough on the teachers, it's tough on the students. Special arrangements to be made to help her learn English and so on. She doesn't get to practice English in the house because, again, they don't have books in English. The parents only speak the Urdu, whatever the language is. So no English spoken in the house. It just goes on and on and on. And so her learning of English is slow. She not allowed to have English speaking friends, or it's discouraged. And so even when she starts high school, her English is quite poor, and she's still getting barbs because her parents still want to do her hair as if it's from the subcontinent and so on. She doesn't want to go against her parents because of you respect your parents, you respect your elders, and that's part of the gig in the culture they come from, and nothing wrong with that, I guess. But the parents are committing a monstrous disservice to her. They think it's they're just showing that, hey, we're different and we're reveling in it, but no, the parents can escape having to deal with it because they go and work for relatives and people in that community and all that sort of stuff. So they don't have to deal with the outside world in the way that the girls do when they're at school. So and it's the same thing with the girl. The guys, when she was getting old enough to date, the guys wouldn't ask her out on dates. They were asking the white chicks out on date. This girl would say, "Well, I was hotter than those white chicks," and yet they were getting the dates and I wasn't, and the hot guys would ignore me, and so on and so forth. So the barbs and the cuts and the hurts and the hurts that she's nursed over all these decades go back all to that time. Now, by the time she gets to 13 or 14, she's starting to assert herself a little bit and say, "Hey, I want to have local. I want to have white friends. I want to have other like girls at school. I want to have white friends. If they want to be friendly with me, I'm happy about that." Now, so her parents were attempting, as she explains it, to dissuade her, but she no, I want to have local white friends, and so she's really 13 or 14 until she starts to fully integrate with, or fully interact with. Integrate's maybe another word, but fully interact with white society. This is just through at that time high school. But again, just in review, does she hold her parents responsible? Does she blame them for not doing everything they could to prepare her for school? And again, if it was my kid, I'd be turning myself inside out to make sure they would speak, because I know that's what they're going to have to deal with. I'd be absolutely focused on making sure they were competent in English. Again, I'd send them to school not with some curry or some shit like. I'd send them to school with some sort of local dish, so they wouldn't stand out, they wouldn't look strange, or I wouldn't have doing her hair in a hairstyle that was manifestly from another country and part of the world, and so on. So I'd be doing all of those things to make sure they didn't stand out. If that meant that I had to go out of my way to do it, then fine. I don't want the kids suffering at school and going through the inevitable taunts and barbs that would happen in the event she goes there without being able to speak the language or looking like she's just arrived from another universe. Now this woman who's now she'd be 60 now. She still notes that her as she talks about it, you can see the trembling and the tone of her voice changes, and you think, gee, she's going to burst down into tears any fucking minute here. That's how vivid and how determined she is to hold on to those hurts. Now, she sees the whole thing as racism. That is fucking racism by fucking Nazis, those white people. And again, she fantasizes about the vengeance that she wants to take against these white people. But trying to sort of, don't you have some sort of idea that your parents are at fault here? They should have got you prepared for school. They're old enough to know the sort of issues you're going to have to deal with. You're in a country where they speak English. Why wouldn't they have you going to kindy, or why wouldn't they do everything they could to get you prepared to speak English in a school where they speak English? And I don't know. She's just not prepared to blame her parents for it. She will grudgingly concede they could have done a little bit more, but that's it. The issue here is the fucking damn racist white people. Now, I would argue that it's not. It's got nothing to do with racism at all. Now, these people who came to Australia, and this is how it continues to this day, they're not required to integrate. There's no effort. There's no conditions. There's no obligations placed on these people to integrate and to make an effort to integrate and to help the children integrate. So there are still vast numbers of children going to school today in Australia that can't speak a word of English. And now there's more services supposedly available now to help them, but it's a vast remedial sort of industry, if you like, that is trying to pick up the pieces or make good from the failures of the past or the early failures. Now, some of these people were, and I talked to them, were in refugee camps for 12 months, 2 years, 18 months, whatever, 6 months. Now, they wanted to go to a white, English-speaking country. They had free English language lessons there for the children, for themselves, for anybody who wanted to go there, totally free of charge. Turn up on the 2 lessons a day, and they don't go They don't make even the slightest effort to learn English, reading and writing. Yet it's all free. It's all laid on. So when they arrive in Australia, still not speaking a word of English, they then make no effort to learn English again. There's no obligation for them to do so. There's no customs and immigration official or immigration official saying, okay, look, you can, but the 6 months you're in this camp, you have to go to English lessons twice a day. Reading and writing English, you have to go. This is not something that is negotiable. You have to do it. And if you don't do it, you won't be getting an immigration stamp on your passport to come to Australia. And you'll stay there until in the immigration, in the refugee camp or wherever it is, until you know, or even if they're not a refugee and they come, they apply from another country, then they have to demonstrate that they're learning English and making it. Their English has to be at least minimally competent before they come. You want to come to an English-speaking country, make an effort to learn English. Now that's not something that if you want to learn English, you're a Nazi. No. These girls or these people who, there are boys too, who mainly girls who nurse the racism business and very much treat that as it was racism. They when the children arrive or they're born from families where they don't speak English as a first language, it should be a mandatory requirement to go to government kindergarten. And again, start the learning English process, because at 2 or 3 years old or something like that, it's going to be a very different scenario to the one when they're 5 or 6 years old going to primary school. So their English lessons can be learned. The parents have to attend English lessons when they get to Australia, and again, it can be provided for free. They have to pay, but they have to make that commitment. They should be broken up and dispersed. You can't go into ghettos with people. You have to be broken up and dispersed. And people that come in, from third world countries or any country, doesn't matter, and don't speak English, if they're dispersed around, there's no other people of their language speaking their language around the place, they do tend to integrate very quickly, and because they have to. They can't just talk to people who speak their language or work for people or work for companies where their language is. But they can't do that. They have to integrate. So when you're a citizen, what are your obligations? Or when you're an immigrant, rather, what are your obligations to integrate? There must be obligations. You're being offered citizenship in another country. Sure, that's good. What are your obligations? Well, what are you obliged to do? And integration, I think, is one of them. And learning the language, of course, is another. So I don't see that any of those children suffered racism at all when they were children. They insisted they did. Again, not so much boys, but girls particularly claim they suffered racism. And yet, as soon as they grow up, the brown-skinned people will marry other brown-skinned people, but insist it's all the white folks that are racist. Well, hold on a minute. If you're determined to hang around with your own genetic group so much, how can you also at the same time say it's all the white people that are racist? Why aren't you marrying a white guy? Oh no, my family would never accept that. Well, then I'm sort of wondering, what is your commitment to integration to come here? If you want to keep all the cultural and spiritual and genetic ties to your old country 100% intact, what's your commitment to integrate? And if you have zero commitment to integrate, why come here, for goodness sakes? So those are the questions I would ask. But in every single case that's been put to me of alleged racism, not one instance would I agree that it's racism. I would see it a failure of these people to make any effort at all to integrate. Now, I'll contrast this with a German family that I remember this when I was a kid, and I knew the boy, and he was about my age and lived not far away, so we kind of would ride bikes and hang out together and all, with other rest of the group, but his family were from Germany, and I think it was Germany. Could have been Denmark. I think it was Germany. And he, his father was, still had a reasonably thick sort of European type accent. he said, no, we're only going to speak English in the house. We're in a country now where they speak English. English is spoken, and I want we all have to integrate here. And I remember admitting, at his age, I don't know how old he was, 30 or something, he admitted he'd probably never lose his accent in English. The woman too, his mother too. But he said that, what's his name, Manfred or something, he can speak local English like with an Australian accent, and you'd never know. He said, so I want him to have that, and I want him to seamlessly integrate into society. So now that's the way to go. So that when I think Manfred was like 1 or something when they came to Australia, but they pulled out all stops, turned somersaults if they had to make sure that he integrated. And I never knew until I met his parents. I never knew that he didn't speak English as a first language, because his accent was you couldn't really pick up an accent on it. I remember a few of the vowels sound a little bit different, but that's an example of people that want to integrate. Now it's a little bit easier for them. They're white and they're Christian, all that sort of stuff. But nonetheless, that's the level of effort and commitment you need to make. He even commented, this guy, the father, that they didn't want to live in an area where there were lots of other Germans, because then they were likely to fall into the trap of taking the easy way out, just talking German all the time, that type of thing. So he had this rule that they wouldn't speak German in the house, which may kind of been that easy, because he and his wife both had quite thick accents, and it would have been, and their English was all right, but it wasn't that good. So they would have, there must have been a lot of sort of natural pressure for them to revert back to German, but he was adamant on it, certainly while I was around anyway. So there was another kid from some other European country, I remember, I think it was Norway or something like Sweden maybe. And again, the parents had quite thick accents, but they were absolutely committed and focused on integrating. Now, they were doing that of their own volition. They weren't trying to, and they were city people, with a better education, that sort of thing, whereas the rural people from even first world countries, would probably take a little bit longer. For example, Greek people from rural areas, they're still three generations to integrate. Whereas, city-based folks from Northwest Europe and that sort of thing, they tend to do it integrated one generation. People who come from places like, say, the United Kingdom, one generation to integrate. That's it. So even kids that might arrive at, when they're, say, even of early high school age, if they come from, say, England as a case in point, they would integrate within that same generation. As in fully integrate, you wouldn't know the difference. So these are the sort of commitments in there, but I don't accept that any of this that they complain about was racism in any way, shape or form, and yet they cling to these fantasies and also cling to these fantasies of taking vengeance against the racism that never occurred. You're Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.